This is the Palin Update on Mama Grizzly Radio. I'm Kevin Scholla in the new full Battle Rattle studios.
You have the same still spine and the moral courage of Washington and Lincoln and Martin Luther King. It is in you. It will sustain you as it sustained them.
This week, we remember the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., many Americans participating in a day of service. Today, we look back at Alveda King's multiple appearances here on the Palin Update. MLK's niece has a lot to say about her uncle, the pro-life movement, and much more. The amazing Alveda King is next. Plus, we'll have the latest national and Alaska headlines in Sarah Palin News. We'll visit the Crow's Nest with Tanya Crow in California. Also from the Golden State, Kelly Carlson is on target. The Millennial Forecast with Sarah Hagmeyer is on the way from New Jersey. And a brand new installment of Liberty and Legacy with Tamara Colbert is coming up from Texas. Welcome to the Palin Update on Mama Grizzly Radio. The Palin Update is sponsored by Full Battle Rattle. Full Battle Rattle, helping veterans suffering from combat-related disabilities through the healing power of music. Learn more at facebook.com/Full Battle Rattle ABQ. As we remember Martin Luther King, we thought it would be a good idea to hear from his niece, Alveda King. Today, we look back at her memorable and powerful appearances here on the Palin Update, the best of Alveda King right now.
There's so much we could talk about with you. I do have to ask you about your uncle, though. To have someone like you here who knew Martin Luther King is just incredible. And, of course, we all know the great things he did, but what about the man himself? What was he like away from the rallies and media coverage? Do you have some special personal memories of your uncle?
Well, when people ask me about my relationship with the famous Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, as his niece, and he and my dad are brothers, and I like to call them the sons of thunder who live in heaven, because my father, Reverend A.D. King, and my uncle, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we called him Uncle M.L. Now, I remember him certainly as the freedom fighter and the leader of the movement. I actually marched and went to jail during the 20th century myself, and I got married 1 year after Dr. King was killed. So I got to know him very well. But I knew him also as Uncle M.L., and we had family dinners together, and a very close family. And he had the most beautiful laughter. His voice was just wonderful to hear him laugh. And my favorite speeches that he made were not the famous speeches, but his sermons. So I remember him preaching, and I remember him loving to eat fried chicken and my mother's sweet potato pie that she would make for family gatherings.
What's your take on race relations in this country today, especially when it comes to politics and coverage of politics? A lot of race baiters out there.
Well, I'm very disturbed about the race relations now, and I was talking to my cousin, Reverend Bernice King. She's the youngest child of Martin and Coretta King, and her concern was, she says, with racial tensions really being pretty high now, we're going to have to encourage the people to behave nonviolently in any reactions. But it was interesting that you'd asked the race baiting question, because there's only one race, the human race. We have different ethnic groups. And because we tend to cling to the separate races, then you find a lot of racial tension. And so I would encourage people to remember that there's a human race with different ethnic groups. And if we can begin to really understand that, then we may be able to resolve some of these problems that we're having.
That's a wonderful point. We've had a lot of pro-life guests on this show. Sarah Palin is obviously a pro-life champion, talking the talk and walking the walk, a hero for life. You are also a champion for the unborn, a fighter, but you came to your defense of life in a much different way than Governor Palin. Can you talk about that journey?
Yes, I can. And I met Governor Palin, heard her remarks, and followed everything that she stands for, family and life and all of that. Of course, my testimony as a post-abortive woman is different. That means I had actual abortions. I had secret abortions that I tried to hide from God, and I did hide from my family for a long time. And only after I repented of those abortions and found great courage in the Lord was I able to become a pro-life voice as well. And so now here in the 21st century, my voice is raised on behalf of the preborn babies, the sick, the elderly. Euthanasia is wrong, abortion is wrong, and most recently, even the debate about the HHS mandate requiring that employers or now insurance companies provide birth control methods for employees. I think that with my voice now raised there as one who was negatively impacted even by artificial birth control when I was a younger woman. So I have much to say for life in this century, and I'm just happy to be one who can be used to proclaim the truth about life.
What about your uncle and abortion? Some controversy there, specifically this recent flap in Utah over license plates. Was Martin Luther King pro-life?
Martin Luther King Jr. was very pro-life, as was my father, Reverend A.B. King, my grandfather, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. I think some people become confused because Planned Parenthood likes to claim that Martin Luther King Jr. was on their side, and he even accepted an award from them in 1966. That's not even true. He was offered the Planned Parenthood Maggie Award, but he did not attend the ceremony. He did not write the speech. His wife, who was pro-choice, attended that ceremony and read a speech that someone else wrote. But if you recall, and some people say, oh, well, if she went for him. It's the same thing. But, you know, President George W. Bush is pro-life. And in her book, Mrs. Laura Bush wrote that she's pro-choice. And so you can have a husband and wife with differing viewpoints. And that's actually what you had with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, don't be like the Romans who committed infanticide to their peril. He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. He said the Negro cannot win if he's willing to sacrifice the futures of his children for immediate personal comfort and safety. And so he was pro-life just like his dad, my grandfather, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., kept me from being aborted in 1950 when my mother wanted an abortion. And when he found out in the mid-1970s that I was about to abort yet another child, he said, oh, no, they're lying to you. That's not a lump of flesh. That's my great-grandchild. Absolutely not. So I grew up in a family that has been pro-life. And once I repented of my secret, my tragic secret, and got back on track, I became a pro-life voice as well.
When you spoke at the Restoring Honor rally that you mentioned a couple of years ago in D.C., Sarah Palin also addressed the huge crowd. How was that? What did you think of the governor?
I just like her. I think she's very delightful and very solid and sound thinking, and it's just a joy to know her.
And you touched on it a little bit earlier. It's wonderful that you're also getting the word out there to folks about the pro-life cause. Everybody talks about abortion, but you also are getting the euthanasia discussion out there as well.
Well, actually, that's true, and I say it in a joking way, but not really. I'm 61 years old, and I would always have said that it's wrong to kill elderly people because you feel as though they're no longer useless. But every year I become more and more convinced.
Everybody say, I think that's universal, right?
Absolutely.
What do you think your uncle would make of Sarah Palin? He certainly drew huge crowds, broke a lot of barriers. The governor can relate to that in a way. Could you imagine them on a stage together?
Well, my uncle had a dream that Protestants and Catholics and Gentiles and Jews would join together and sing Free at Last. And I'd like to think that if he met Governor Palin, he'd be happy to add her to that chorus.
You know, I've talked to you about this before in the past, and maybe you'll say the same stuff, maybe not, but I really want to throw this out there again because, you know, a lot of people talk about all the wonderful things he did and how he stood up to people when he had to, and that is, of course, you know, the reason we recognize him. But you know, I really just like to hear you talk about him as your uncle. I'd like to know, what do you think about when you think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when you think about him just as your uncle, not so much as this leader, but as your uncle? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was Uncle M.L., and I talk about him in my book, King Rules, and You'll hear me say Uncle ML and Daddy. My dad was A.D. King. So they were brothers, and they kind of grew up together, of course. So when they got married, they always said, Daddy said, he would say when they were little, when we grow up, we'll marry women who look alike so our children look alike. And interestingly enough, their wives were the same height, had the same body type, same hair, all of that. And I have one picture of my mother and Uncle Emil's wife, Uncle Alveda, and they really looked like sisters in that picture. So that was how close they were. And I often went to church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, when Uncle Emil was preaching there. So I actually had opportunities to sit in a congregation where he was preaching, and those are things I remember.
Now, when you were a young girl and you were around him, did you realize all that was really going on and the magnitude of what he was doing? And then as you got older, how did your appreciation for his courage and the things he did change?
No one knew or understood the magnitude of what we were doing during those years. You have to remember, in 1963, I went on my own civil rights march, and it was the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama, after the 16th Street Church was bombed, 16th Street Baptist Church. I went to school with one of the little girls, I think the McNair girl. Also, our own home, A.D. and Naomi King's Church Parsonage, had been bombed in May, the night before Mother's Day. And Mom writes about that in her book, A.D. and M.L. King, Two Brothers Who Dared to Dream. And I also did as well write about it, too. So I was part of that movement, and I knew my uncle, my dad, my grandfather, all were involved in that movement. You don't necessarily think about the magnitude of something when you're doing it, and that was the case.
You know, one of the great things that comes from Martin Luther King Day nowadays is this day of service. A lot of people get out there and, you know, they have the day off from work, they have the day off from school, and instead of going shopping or doing whatever that we see on so many holidays, unfortunately, people are going out and helping. They're getting into communities, you know, simple things, raking leaves, painting, reading to kids. That's a great legacy, isn't it, that your uncle left behind?
Well, yes, and the theme of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, which was founded by Uncle Emil's wife, Uncle Retta, a day on and not a day off, is their theme that's ongoing. I think my cousin, when he was president, Dexter Scott King, came up with that theme, and then now Bernice King, who is the CEO now of the King Center, hers is 365 days of nonviolence. And she said, make a moratorium on any type of violence, especially on the holiday and on my uncle's birthday. No violent thoughts, no violent words. Even just an unkind word towards someone is a violent thing, you know. So practicing nonviolence and serving others. Uncle Emil loved the scripture Jesus had. In order to be great in God's kingdom, you have to be a servant of all. And Uncle Emil would say, everyone can be great because everyone can serve.
You know, Martin Luther King used action and took action when he was talking about race, but it seems that you're doing that with the pro-life issue. And is that something you're calling on others to do, to defend life, and not by just saying it or saying, hey, look, I'm pro-life, but going out there and taking action?
Well, we'd have to recognize that civil rights actually begins in the womb, because a person is a person from actually conception or fertilization, or, you know, right from the very moment the chromosomes come together. That makes a person. And so if we really want to have civil rights, we have to consider every human being. And that's a kind of a universal message. It's not only limited to skin color, but just a human being is a human being. My father, Reverend A.D. King, loves Acts 17:26, of one blood God made all people to dwell on the face of the earth. So since we are all people, we need to love each other regardless of our differences. What brings us together is the fact that we were created to be a human family.
Governor Palin, Sarah Palin, has quoted Martin Luther King many times. You know, Palin's known, obviously, for calling out people on both sides of the aisle, no matter what their political stance are, if they're not doing their job. But, you know, along with Ronald Reagan, I'd say Martin Luther King is one of those that she's really looked up to and has really, you know, put out there many times quotes and just have encouraged people to follow his word and things that he has said. So what does that do for you as a family member to see all these years later that even when we're going through turmoil, that you have somebody like Governor Palin and, big people out there who are still spreading the word of Dr. King, and not just in January, but all year long?
Well, I believe that people were inspired or angered from Martin Luther King Jr., and I know that Governor Palin has been inspired by him. So people quote him for various reasons, of course, and I think that it's just fine. I having known my uncle and loved my uncle, he wanted to inspire people, to help people, and I believe that was his goal. So he's there for everyone to know and know about. And I'll make a quick reference to the movie Selma, because several people told me, well, I saw Selma, or should I see Selma? And I saw Selma, and I think it had some tremendous entertainment value and historical interest. It wasn't a documentary. It's not a documentary. But it should put people on a path of maybe exploring and finding out more. For instance, my dad was in Selma. He was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He experienced being beat up and all of that. And they never mentioned Martin Luther King Jr.'s brother in the movie. But there again, it wasn't a documentary. So I saw the movie, and I recommended it. I think it's unfortunate we're having another squabble about the Oscar panels being racist and all of that. But having said all of that, I think historically it's important that people know about Martin Luther King. I'm glad he's still relevant today.
Well, Dr. Alveda King, you are certainly relevant. Wonderful to speak to, as always. She is the author of King Rules. You got to check it out if you haven't yet. Dr. Alveda King, the niece of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Big week this week on his special day, Martin Luther King Day. And Dr. King, thank you so much. God bless you for all you do, and we're going to talk to you again, I hope, down the road.
God bless you and your audience. Bye-bye.
For more on our great friend, pro-life warrior, Alveda King, follow her on Twitter at Alveda C. King. Now it's time for Sarah Palin News, headlines, and more about Governor Palin. Big news this past week. SarahPalin.com is here, a brand new website. It is awesome. Please check it out, SarahPalin.com. Palin highlights Chick-fil-A for 2 heartwarming stories. The governor applauds President-elect Trump's historic presser. The Washington Post is busted. Happy birthday, Rush. A big surprise from a Hollywood liberal. The CIA's global warming problem, and a walk-on QB walks in to the Trump administration. To read about all these stories, visit the Mama Grizzly Radio Facebook page. To see any of the governor's posts in their entirety, visit Sarah Palin's Facebook page. Follow her on Twitter at Sarah Palin USA. Check out SarahPac.com, and don't miss the new SarahPalin.com. Now let's head to the crow's nest. Here's Tanya Crow.
Thanks, Kevin. Happy New Year, everybody. January 20th, 2017 is just around the bend. And here we come into a new era of prosperity. A thriving, flourishing, successful condition. Under the leadership of Donald J. Trump, the authentic, no-nonsense, practical leadership that we have. And when Donald J. Trump calls out somebody about all talk and no action, it makes me think about, where am I all talk and no action? And what it takes to make prosperity a reality. This is going to be a time of action. The American dream that supports liberty for all, so that we can do and be and create any possibility, can become a reality. And take the actions that are necessary to make the changes that I want to make to bring prosperity. Looking forward to an effortful, truthful, and action-filled next year. This is Tanya Crow with Mama Grizzly Radio.
Tanya Crow on Mama Grizzly Radio. More from the Crow's Nest next week. Now, on target. with Kelly Carlson.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm sitting here with our good friend Ed Calderon. Some of the listeners may be familiar with his social media presence. It's called Ed's Manifesto. Ed is a very, very good friend of my husband, Dan, and I, and we were sitting around the dinner table last night talking about Mexico, because that's where Ed is from. And we were talking about the political trend and the way it's headed and where it might end up in 2 years, because there is an election. Now, we're focused on the border, and that's super important. Kevin, you know how important the border is to me. But when Ed brought this up last night about who may come into office, this is a much more important subject Americans need to be aware of and keep their finger on the pulse. Before Ed gets into it, Ed, can you just give us a quick summary of your background? And I know that's really hard to do, but if you can.
Yes. Thank you, Kelly. I am a over 12-year veteran of public service in Mexico. I worked operationally, doing counter narcotics, and some executive protection at high levels down in Mexico, and just did law enforcement work basically throughout the northern part of Mexico.
Who did you work for?
I
forget his name.
I worked for the I worked for a time. I worked for the governor of Baja. His name is Osuna.
Okay.
And I also did some work as far as operational work for some of the law enforcement agencies in the border.
And Osuna, is that how you pronounce
Yes.
it? He was a conservative.
He was very to the right of the political spectrum, a very conservative, deeply
And
conservative.
you were telling me about him and how you loved working for him. And then that's when you segued into the presence of the far, far left party in Mexico that is waiting in the wings.
Yes. Well, right now we're seeing this turmoil going down in Mexico. The peso, our national coin, took a dive with the during the recent election, and Ford Motor Company canceled a few projects they had down there. So that kind of furthered things down that road. Morale, and all of a sudden the federal government in Mexico stopped capping the oil prices and the fuel prices down there, so people are paying almost twice as much for oil for gas for their cars than they were only a few months ago.
You said there's a big Chinese presence.
So with all of the American investors kind of backing off some of the projects down there, Chinese interest in China's investors are kind of filling that void right now down there. And you see this whole leftist kind of trend going on with the discontent with the government down there, and how people are just fed up with everything down there. And there's a political figure in the wings kind of feeding off all of this negativity, all this turmoil, basically.
And you say he's similar to?
He is very much a Hugo Chavez type figure.
Yikes.
Right? So we have elections in 2 years, and this individual actually declared himself president once after he lost the elections.
So he's a dictator.
He is very much I mean, he's a
anti-American.
He is anti-American, very, very to the left. He did a lot of events down in Venezuela when Hugo Chavez was there. He had a deep relationship with Fidel Castro.
And this is scary because now this is our neighbor south of the border.
It could be.
It could be.
It could be 2 years from now. You're going to have a Venezuela-like situation in the form of Mexico.
And their allies are not people we want close to us.
No, their interests are not in line with that of the Americans. I mean, that leftist political energy in Mexico is feeding off both the anti-Americanism kind of coming up after the elections, and the current kind of political strife that this current administration has down there. So they're very much kind of pushing themselves forward now.
If you had any advice for Trump, real quickly, we have to wrap this up, but what would that be as far as this election coming up in 2 years?
to not miss the opportunity to make contact with the political figures that are very much to the right of the political spectrum down there. They do have a following. A lot of Mexico's middle class families, working class families, have ties to this political group.
The conservative
the
one.
conservative one, in the form of the PAN or the PAN party. There's a lot of good people out there that are willing and able to kind of take the reins if things were to go north down there.
But if the Mexican populace is anti-American, they're going to vote with the anti-American candidate.
Yes, well, I mean,
It's a possibility.
it's a possibility. So we have a large amount of poor people down there that are very much to the left of the political spectrum, and the small middle class we have is very much to the right. So that's the dynamic we have down there.
I think it's important that Trump gets the proper advice when it comes to Mexico, because it's not just the border, but we want to get along too. You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely.
So, and I want to do another segment and come back. I want to do more on this, but also on the next one, I really want to talk about your experience with Fast and Furious, because you were on the other side of Fast and Furious in Mexico. And I think our listeners are going to be not shocked when they hear what Ed has to say about it.
Definitely.
Cool. Okay, thank you so much, Ed. I
Thank you,
really,
Kelly.
really appreciate it. This is Kelly Carlson with Mama Grizzly Radio. Good night.
Tune in for more On Target next week. It's time for the Millennial Forecast. Here's Sarah Hagmeyer.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Social media really makes me wonder, do blonde lives matter? A young blonde notoriously known for her final thoughts is doing exactly what she is supposed to do. Tommy Lauren is waking up and shaking up the millennial generation. In a winter wonderland of finicky snowflakes, Tommy Lauren is the top of the line snowblower. Feminists will cringe when they hear her voice. Millennials will rant endlessly about the successful news personality. And what's incredible is that Tommy is doing everything within her constitutional right. Tommy, as super successful as she is, as young as she is getting a lot of attention, but also a lot of hate. Over the course of a few weeks, her name has been trending with false death on Twitter, as well as trends telling her to shut up with #ShutUpTommyLauren. These people don't even want her to exist. But just like Donald Trump, the biggest voices in media will often get ridiculed the most. Tommy might be a small-town girl, but she is a tough girl, and also a fighter. As a young blonde woman myself, yes, Tommy, your life and your voice matters. However, I want to know where the raging feminists are when conservative women are getting called bimbos and are receiving death threats online for having a different opinion. I want to know where the raging feminists are when Tommy is doing her job. And liberals have a problem with it because she's not broadcasting their liberal BS. Unfortunately, snowflakes will still be snowflakes, and that's why the forecast for millennials still hasn't changed. Tommy Lauren will continue to share her 2 to 3 minute long videos, and the millennials will still be having meltdowns over them. For Mama Grizzly Radio, I'm Sarah Hagmeyer, and that was your Millennial Forecast.
And next week, we'll have a new edition of the Millennial Forecast right here on the Palin Update. Now, the Palin Update with Kevin Scholla presents Liberty and Legacy. Here's Tamara Colbert.
Liberty and legacy encompasses so many facets of our lives. It's our national heritage, our birthright, our family lineage, but also our passions, our hobbies, the interests that we reflect as individuals. This week, my heart was broken with the announcement that the San Diego Chargers would no longer be in San Diego, but that the team owners were moving them to Los Angeles. Ugh. And despite all the best efforts by many people this year, I still love the NFL and football. It's been my joy, my sports joy for many years, even though I love a variety of sports. What I find most intriguing is that San Diego refused to be bullied by Roger Goodell's NFL and the Spanos family. I love that. The NHL tried to do it to San Diego in the 70s, and the San Diegans said, bye-bye, Gulls hockey team, and they've never had a hockey team since. In the late 80s, 90s, the NBA told San Diego they had to tax citizens to get a better stadium worthy of the Clippers. San Diegans said, bye-bye, Clippers and NBA, and they've never had an NBA team since. This week, the mayor of San Diego, the city council, and thousands of heartbroken Chargers fans said bye-bye, NFL. Because on November 8th, San Diego refused to be bullied by a big, heavy-handed NFL conglomerate that cares more about their image than the fans. Thank you, Roger Goodell, for your terrible management. Yes, this is my show, and I get to say that. Ew, you're terrible. You're the worst commissioner we've ever had in the NFL. You own this and anything else that results from the Rams moving to LA, from San Diego now moving to LA, sharing a stadium. Let's be clear. Who shares a stadium? How ridiculous is that concept? You know why the Rams and the Chargers are going to have to share a stadium? Because Los Angeles cannot sustain even one single NFL franchise. It fails in LA. Why? It's too expensive for the people who live there, and there's a million other things to do in La La Land. So again, San Diego residents said, why would we vote to raise our own taxes simply to support an NFL franchise? What about these big, top-down, heavy-handed groups do they not understand? Did Roger Goodell not see what happened on November 8th? Hello? I mean, let's be clear. Since Goodell took over as commissioner, the NFL has started its steady descent into the netherworld of former NFL awesomeness because there are no more Dick Butkuses, Mean Joe Greens, Lynn Swans, Terry Bradshaws, Lance Bambi Allworth, Dan Fouts, Kellen Winslow, Howie Long. Where are these guys? These were the men of the gridiron, tough, winners, committed, strong, resilient, warriors who captivated so many of us on any given Sunday for a majority of our lives. There's one thing. I grew up in San Diego. I live in Dallas now. But the Spanos family has never liked San Diego. Why, in goodness sakes, would you buy a franchise in a city you don't even like? Again, man, I wish I could have won that $1 billion lotto. Seriously, 2 years ago when it was $1 billion Mega Millions National Lotto, I did buy a ticket, and what I would have done with that, I would have bought the Chargers from the Spanos family, and I would have done what they did to Green Bay Packers and turned it over to the fans and made it a public property so the fans could invest in the franchise. Man, that would have been awesome. But you know, who am I? Just a simple American football fan, right? And we can all recite the numerous reasons why we're ticked off at the owners or whatever. But the Spanos family, unfortunately, never put their cards on the table to deal honestly with San Diego, with the fans, and truly letting us know their interest was never in keeping San Diego Chargers in their hometown of 56 years. It would have been better if they would have put them up for sale. Heck, that would have been awesome, and see what happens. A city councilman, Chris Ward, in San Diego this week said that the Chargers haven't earned a place in line ahead of the millions of hardworking San Diegans who have supported them for decades, and it is not appropriate to spend their hard-earned money just to keep them. A sports team. Entertainment, folks. He said this was a sad day for the fans, that the Chargers' commitment to the city was merely contingent upon receiving hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. Gosh, that sounds like our political parties, doesn't it? You pay me or I'm going to go find someone else. Instead of being, hey, I'm with you, these guys are trying to say the fans should be with us. You owe us. Sorry, franchises, the fans don't owe you anything. When government, when big business, when anyone loses sight of the people, ultimately the people make the final decision for your idea, your business, your team's success or failure. The American people are tired of being pushed around, whether it's the federal government or the owners of a sports franchise. We're tired of massive overreach, of the power grabs, of saying that we owe you anything. We don't owe you a doggone thing. But we do believe, in fairness, we should be dealing with each other openly and honestly. And we didn't get that in San Diego from the Spanos family. And we certainly, as citizens of the United States, haven't been getting open and honest dealings by anyone on Capitol Hill for decades. I mean, for goodness sakes, here we go. Just this week alone, Donald Trump hasn't even been inaugurated as the 45th president. And we've, for the second time since November 8th, the Republican-led House is trying to bring back earmarks. Hello? Was anyone of you big elitists awake on November 8th? Did you pay any attention to the staunch repudiation of stink? Hello? Donald Trump is going to be our next president in 5 days. We the people, we woke up on a variety of levels. And any elitist who thinks they know better than we do, you're all still inside your bubble thinking that losing is everyone else's fault. I think it's we the people 1, elitists 0. That's my scorecard and I'm sticking to it. Sadly, I have to say goodbye to my home team forever. There won't be any more San Diego Chargers. But I want to thank them for the amazing childhood memories. I will never forget Air Coryell. And of course, Dan Fouts and that hipster beard that I'm sorry I never knew a 22-year-old young man could grow such a beard. I mean, for goodness sakes, he was awesome. What about these incredible players who always amazed and frustrated, depending upon that week and, yes, the season? And of course, I still hold Jerry Rice in my mind's eye, his crushing wings of glory for my Chargers' only Super Bowl appearance and loss to the 49ers. But I love me some football, and I always will. It just won't be any team owned by the Spanos family. But now, I live in Dallas, and I'm gonna enjoy rooting for the Dallas Cowboys, thanking Jerry Jones for not just putting his focus on making a great team, but doing things for the fans and to make the fan experience as great as he's making his team. Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, woohoo, love it. You know what? We all have to thank any of those who paved the way, who remember to keep the fan, the person, the people number one. So now I'm a Cowboys fan. And quite frankly, a Patriots fan too, because Tom Brady. Enough said. We'll move on. For those of you, when your team loses this weekend, because on any given Sunday, any team can pull out victory. Instead of blaming it on the quarterback or the owners or the franchise, why don't you just blame it on the Russians? Because evidently everybody else is blaming their losses on the Russians too. Heck, if the shoe fits, go for it. Tweet me this week. I want to know what you think at Tamara Colbert, hashtag Mama Grizz Radio. As a super fan, looking forward to the Cowboys playing and heading towards that Super Bowl ring. I'm Tamara Colbert for Mama Grizzly Radio.
Tamara Colbert in Texas. Tune in for more Liberty and Legacy next week. And to learn about Convention of States, head to conventionofstates.com. The Palin Update, including Liberty and Legacy, the Millennial Forecast, On Target, and the Crow's Nest is on demand and available for download. So just head to mamagrizzlyradio.com, pick the show you want to hear, and you can listen anywhere, anytime. Well, that'll just about do it for this edition of the Palin Update on Mama Grizzly Radio. Visit mamagrizzlyradio.com for continuing coverage of Governor Palin. Also, like Mama Grizzly Radio on Facebook and follow along on Twitter at Mama Grizz Radio, at Kevin Scholla, at Tamara Colbert, at Tanya Yoga 13, at S Hagmeyer 2, and at FBR ABQ. And I'm doing some writing for Breitbart News. Go to Breitbart.com and search Kevin Scholla. I want to thank Tamara Colbert, Tanya Crow, Kelly Carlson, Sarah Hagmeyer, and everyone here at Mama Grizzly Radio. Thanks to Alveda King, and thank you for listening today. A special thanks to our sponsor, Full Battle Rattle. Visit Facebook.com/Full Battle Rattle ABQ. The Palin Update is produced by Lena Anderson, the Andy L. Kramer, and Lori Ann Lewis. Please be sure to join us again next time for another edition of the Palin Update right here on Mama Grizzly Radio. The next time we talk to you, Donald Trump will be the president. I'm Kevin Scholla. Have a pleasant day and happy inauguration.